Hi, and welcome to the DecisionWise Engaging People podcast. My name's Charles Rogel. I'll be moderating our session today. I'm joined today by Chris Storey.
Hello, everyone.
Chris is one of our consultants here at DecisionWise, and today we're going to talk about a very timely topic on crisis communication. Chris, do you want to give us the kind of overall outline of our discussion today?
Yeah, sure. There are three things that we want to talk about in relation to communication. As you mentioned, Charles, crisis communication, in particular, what we might do during this COVID-19 situation that we're in, as well as common pitfalls that we see as we survey organizations and speak with executives. And lastly, how communication is tied to engagement.
Okay. So to kick off around the first topic of crisis communication, I'll ask the dumb question, and why is communication so important right now? It's a topic on everyone's mind.
Well, it is kind of a silly question because it's actually comes up as one of our lowest ranked survey items often as we survey companies. There's even a joke that we sometimes have said that, tell a client that I can debrief your survey before you even have it, and it's going to be about communication.
Right.
So that's always an issue, but it is more important at this time. And let me just point out a couple reasons why it is. First off, if we go back to our physics classes years ago, we learned that nature abhors a vacuum, which is the idea that nature doesn't contain vacuums because the denser surrounding material immediately fills it. And so the same can be true during a time such as this of uncertainty, where employees might see a vacuum of information and go ahead and fill it in with their own reality or what they might be guessing is going on.
Yeah, it's funny to hear how many rumors or bits of false information you've heard about the COVID-19 virus right now.
That's right. The fake news is on the rise, right? Even with
toilet paper shortages.
That's right. We've had water shortages, water bottle shortages. It's kind of like, I don't know how that's helpful right now. We have tap water still, but anyway, so that can happen in organizations. So, people might be wondering, for example, is headcount going to be reduced, or what's my place in this organization? So we want to fill that void proactively, and oftentimes that can assuage fears or how employees might be feeling. The last point there is that not that we want hardship, but it can be a chance to be more deliberate and to succeed in some ways that we don't normally tend to succeed. So there's the idea that change begets change. So we're in a time of change, and it's a chance to change different patterns that we get kind of ruts that we fall into that aren't as effective. We even have a story of a company that we worked with in California. If you remember, last year they had some devastating wildfires. And we happen to have data from a company that before and after one of these wildfires. And we found that engagement had increased in this company. So there was a sense that they had banded together, become focused around some common goals. And so this is a time when, again, we don't wish these crises to come upon us, but there might be some ways that we can improve because of them.
So communication means a lot of things. What kind of communication is the most important right now?
Yeah, I would point out three different types, and maybe one of them is more important, but I would start with just kind of the top-down communication. This is what we mentioned earlier, that leaders tried to fill in a vacuum or that might be there. Often one of our survey items that scores the lowest is that senior leaders know what's going on, or that they communicate with the organization effectively. And, so there's a chance for senior leaders to be communicating. I even know a company right now that has had almost daily communication with their employees, and it's not always very long or, a labored task, but they help them know just what's going on, and that helps people feel in the loop. But secondly, there's kind of the bottom-up communication. We've actually had some business leaders calling us and telling us stories about listening to their frontline employees, and those employees find different channels, business channels, and ways to offer value right now. So at this time when we can't really have our finger on everything that's going on as senior leaders, it's even more important to listen to those frontline employees who are seeing things on the ground level. And lastly, I would just say that the cross-functional or maybe horizontal piece of communication, those informal experiences employees have where they talk to each other as they, the water cooler talk, but even after a meeting, when a manager grabs his team together and says, hey, let me just tell you a couple things that happened, or you see a colleague, hey, let me share this idea. Those are breaking down right now as employees work remotely. And it's just good to recognize that. And there are some things we can do to mitigate that and increase collaboration. Maybe it's daily check-ins or shared document tools or whatever it might be. I would just point out that some of that collaboration element is going down right now.
Yeah, it's important to maintain that. And so I think the toughest thing for managers now is having to be the deliverer of bad news to their employees. So how should they approach that if they do have bad news to deliver?
Yeah, we do see often that employees don't want it to be sugar-coated. They want honesty and transparency. So I would just make the point that we can't stop bad things from happening, but we can be honest. And we can provide leadership right now. And so those are a couple points. And when decisions are made, it can be helpful to explain why they were made or how leaders came to those decisions. And again, that just helps people feel included. And if that does need to happen, as much as executives can, be with employees, be in the line of sight, and have those organic experiences.
Visibility or electronic visibility.
Yeah.
Some sort.
Yeah.
So then what have you seen in terms of some problems in terms of how organizations execute communication?
Yeah, well, when we administer a survey, we check items related to, basic satisfaction, having the tools and resources to do my job, as well as employee engagement. And when we deliver the results, what we see is organizations often respond by gravitating to the structural solutions.
Yeah.
So they might say, hey, let's get Slack, or let's make a newsletter every week. And not that those are bad, and I have nothing against newsletters, but often it's important to diagnose where that lack of communication might have come from originally, or what our culture is around communication. So, for example, what do we really care about? What do we really want to share? What's our relationship with employees and senior leaders? What's that look like? So those are the things you'd want to address and to not fall into that common pitfall.
Yeah, I think people want an opportunity to hear some personality sometimes, because they want to connect, especially if you're talking about like a CEO. They kind of want to get to know you. So the more you can kind of be maybe more vulnerable, I think, more personal with people, the more they'll listen.
Yeah.
The more connected they are.
Yeah, that kind of relates to our other point about engagement, right? That you could think of information or communication as kind of an informational exchange.
Yeah.
But if it's more, it actually can be more of a transformational or a connection experience. And so, yeah, I think it's important.
Yeah, let's talk
to
about
remember
that. So in terms of engagement, how does communication, I guess, influence an employee's sense of engagement?
Yeah, that's a great question. We'd point out first off that what engagement is, just for listeners, reminding them that engagement is this emotional state, this connection to the organization in which you use your discretionary mental energy and emotions to dedicate towards your work. And so it's this kind of a little bit of an abstract, or it's an emotional state that's tough to affect or to act on. However, we do know from our research that there are a few things that do lead to engagement. So that would be meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. We've talked about connection already.
Yeah. And it's interesting because sometimes it's, it can act almost as a detractor. So if it's not happening enough or not the right things, it can be frustrating. And if it is happening okay and you're getting good updates, it still could not be engaging. So I like how you're approaching this in terms of understanding how do we infuse meaning or autonomy or other engaging elements into our communication.
Yeah, so let's talk about those a little bit. When we're talking about meaning, what we mean by that is the purpose has meaning beyond the job itself.
Or your work does.
Your work does, yeah. Your work has purpose beyond the job itself. And so part of that is thinking, well, what are the personal goals of the employee, and how do we align his or her goals with what they're doing every day? And that takes communication. But it's also about what the company stands for, the mission, the vision behind the company. And the more we can communicate about that, and especially during this time of crisis, we might be able to replace feelings of uncertainty with reassurance about this is where we're going, this is what we believe in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one point. There's actually a story that we tell of a company that made pacemakers and some different medical equipment, and senior leaders had some of the patients or the survivors who benefited from these devices come in and meet some of these employees, shake their hands and say thank you. That provided a lot of meaning for them. So sometimes communication, I think to your point, Charles, is it's information exchange, but it might not be in words. It might be showing up to say hi or having an experience. Those are forms of communication too.
Yeah.
A couple other points there about communication and how it connects to engagement. Let's speak a little bit about autonomy. Right now, companies might be forced to allow a little more autonomy than they might have in the past.
All the complaints that I've seen in employee surveys about wanting to work from home have now been fulfilled.
That's right. Now they're finding, with all this rope, I can hang myself. I better watch out. No, it's a common issue actually that employees feel trusted, and that's great, but they don't know where the boundaries are, and that takes a little bit of work on the part of the manager, but it's really well worth it. When we talk about autonomy, we don't want, no accountability. Otherwise, it's just anarchy. So we do want to define where the boundaries are and what outcomes are important. So going on to, it's important to note as we talk about growth that employees are being stretched right now, but it may not be the type of stretching that they like or that they want. And so sometimes we just say, oh, you're growing. But through communication, one-on-one with a manager can determine whether it's the right kind of growth or it's the growth the employee wants. So that there's another place where communication can lead to engagement.
And it's also difficult now, growth opportunities within the organization, formal training is probably being slowed down a bit within companies. And so how do we help people feel like they're growing and developing and learning when they're working from home or when, we have less interaction with other people? It's going to be really important.
To that question there, there probably are lots of different random type projects or maybe unusual projects that are surfacing right now.
Yeah.
And if managers know kind of what kinds of growth or skills their employees want to develop and have, they might be even better suited to hand those off in a way that does result in growth. So that's something to keep in mind. As we speak to impact, just to reiterate, impact is seeing a positive and worthwhile outcome as a result of your work. So recognition is a big part of this. And other studies have shown that have been done years before some of what we've done at DecisionWise, but they've showed that recognition is one of the second highest motivators if we're talking just strictly motivation. Mm-hmm. So that's going to come through communication. Often we find that managers, when they have one-on-ones, tend to give better expectations and more recognition. And so that's a vehicle to kind of have that kind of communication. And finally, I'll just speak a little bit about a connection. We talked about it already. But let me illustrate it a little bit with a story from the John Deere Company. The John Deere Company has some operations in Asia. And there's a story told of how they were facing a tight labor market, and they were actually, one of their offices had a lot of turnover and low engagement, and it was in India. And they thought about the problem, and they thought, well, maybe part of it's because there's not organizational connection. These employees here maybe have never seen a tractor or driven by fields as we may have done in the U.S. And so they decided to do a few different things for the employee's first day. So if you're an employee at John Deere after this program, here's what you would experience. You'd get an email that says, here's who I am. I'm your supervisor. Here's a picture. You'd get instructions on where to park your car and what to wear that day. So you'd be able to show up on your first day, know right where to park, see your manager and recognize him or her from the photo. There's a banner of your name when you walk in, welcome. You go up to your desk, and your computer has a photo of a John Deere tractor at sunset on a farm.
Ooh.
And you look down, there's also a gift of one of the original self-polishing plows that John Deere made in 1836 with a card that explains why farmers loved it so much. And there's an email in your inbox right away, and that's from the CEO explaining, here's some of what we stand for at John Deere. Welcome to your first day. And anyway, there were some other things that happened, but they redesigned that whole process, and they ended up seeing engagement go up quite a bit and turnover decreased. And some employees joked that they wanted to do their first day again so they could have that experience.
If they didn't before.
So that just illustrates what we mean by organizational communication, that there's a connection to the brand. There's a buy-in or an identification with the values of the company. And so these are all parts of or outgrowths to communication in times of crisis or at any time. And I would hope that as we think about the culture of communication, or why would we communicate, these magic elements give us reason or a reason to communicate.
That's great. So how would you, I guess, sum it up? If we're in a crisis mode right now in terms of the COVID-19 virus, managers are looking for effective ways to communicate and listen to their employees. What are kind of how would you know that you're kind of accomplishing the objective, so to speak?
I think the only way you're going to know that is if you listen to the employees, you speak to them, you reach out, find out a little bit about how they're doing kind of personally, but as well as how your task's going. And I think as you hear back a little bit about that, you're going to know if you're doing it the right way. And also, we talked about assuaging fears or the vacuum and the stories that we tell ourselves to fill in that vacuum. It'd be interesting to find out what that is, to seek to uncover what's on the minds of employees, what's the ground level communication. So finding out a little bit about that so that you can respond to it well. I think if you did that, you would know whether you're succeeding.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Well, great. Anything else you want to add to the topic today?
No, thank you. It's been great to speak with you, Charles, and on this important topic.
Well, thanks everyone for joining, and we look forward to having you join us on our future podcast. Bye, everybody.
Bye.